Today we're gonna talk about 5 common epoxy mistakes and how to fix them or prevent them. And stick around for number 5, because this one is rarely talked about ever.
Welcome, this is Tom from Cool About Woodworking, and our first mistake is to not measure or mix our epoxy resin correctly. Epoxy is a two-part system that requires kind of precise measurements and really thorough mixing. If you don't measure or mix correctly, the resin won't cure properly and your project will have soft spots or will be completely ruined. A question I get asked a lot is how precise do I have to be with my measuring? Well, you don't need to be 100% exact. So what I mean with that, if you're a milliliter over or under, it doesn't really matter. Just get it as close as possible. Where you have to be super precise though is mixing. You cannot undermix your epoxy. If you do so, you will have soft spots in your final product and there is no coming back. So you have to scrape the epoxy and start from scratch. Always read the instructions on the labels of the epoxies, how to mix them and how long to mix them. For example, the first one was a Diablo resin, which is a 2:1 ratio, and I mixed it with a measuring cup. This one here is a 1:1 ratio, and I need much less of that. So if I have smaller amounts, I like to use those measuring spoons, which are super handy and extremely exact as well. The second mistake is using the wrong type of epoxy resin for your project. There are different types of epoxy resin, each with its own properties and uses. Using the wrong type of resin can cause cracks, bubbles, or even that the epoxy doesn't cure at all. Choosing the right type of epoxy depends on the specific application desired for that epoxy. For example, the depth of the pour, the curing time, viscosity, strength and durability, chemical resistance, even UV resistance or clarity all play a factor. For my applications, I'm using 2 different kinds of epoxy mostly. One is the deep pour river cast from Health of Mindart and the Pure Glass from Health of Mindart. I'm using the river cast for my deep pours and I'm using the Pure Glass usually for my ocean effects or for any kind of flood coating I'm doing. The deeper the pour it is, the longer the curing time should be. This helps releasing the bubbles. Yes, I know there's a couple of bubbles issue we are having here, but that's because I made a mistake. So number 3, we are talking about bubbles. Not those bubbles, man. Like the bubbles in the epoxy. Oh my god, he's such an idiot. Let's just move on. With epoxy, you will never get an absolute zero bubble free finish. There's always gonna be some micro bubbles in there, but some of them are worse, like this example here. This is usually caused by not prepping the surface properly, which I mean like sealing the wood, or by temperature issues when the epoxy cures too quickly. I always pop my bubbles with the torch. I also let it sit before the pour a little bit in my bucket to get rid of the first initial lot of bubbles and then pour it gently into the foam. If you have surface bubbles like this, you can still deal with them. You just scrape them off and then maybe put a flat coat on top of it, depending on what pigment you used, that will look alright. The real problem we're having is with enclosed bubbles. Those ones, you can't do anything about them, so just try to prevent them. Which brings us to number 4, building the molding correctly, not leak-proofing it, and no mold release. If you had ever a leak in a mold, you know how stressful that gets. This epoxy goes everywhere straight away. It is imperative to really leak-proof your foam. So I do have a full-on video how I build my reusable leak-proof foams, and I will link them in the description below. Pro tip, I'm doubling down on the cork or the silicone always with tape around the edges and the corners. This just makes it absolutely leak-proof. Remember that one time I used acrylic and hot glue for my foam? It didn't go that well. Bonus tips. So make sure that your epoxy mold is level before you pour your epoxy. Not like I did here, and then find out later that you didn't clamp down your slab properly.
Number 5, guys, is insects and debris flying around in your shop. It's very important to prevent insects or other debris flying into your shop, sawdust whatsoever. It is important to have a clean and dust-free environment, which nobody ever has. So, how do we do it best? I cover all my projects with painter's plastic. Super cheap, easy, you can reuse them as long as you don't get epoxy on it, which I almost always do. It's very simple and easy to do. Just put the plastic on top of it, cover it, and that's good. I recently made this mistake myself. I did cover it with painter's plastic, but the problem was that my clamps were sticking up and there was a hole underneath where insects could go in. And if you see closely here, come close, it was one of those massive flies that were lying into it. So I dug it quickly out, got it out. Now I have to drill out the little dirt specks that came in there, and then I fill it up with tabletop epoxy. So this is how you fix one of those gouges. If you see it before it's cured, no problem. Just pick it out with a toothpick or some kind of tweezers, whatever. Just try to get everything out. Don't leave a little leg in there. Sometimes you don't see it. So go in there with a light so that you can see every single little bit of debris. Oh, you're still here, guys. Sorry, I gotta move on to this project. I appreciate you, as always. Now get out of here.